John Grisham needs no introduction, but I'm required by statute to give one anyway. Since the publication of his first novel, The Time to Kill, in 1989, John has written 48 consecutive #1 bestsellers, which have sold an estimated 33 zillion copies worldwide and been translated into 274 languages, including Sanskrit and the ancient Coptic. He is a 2-time winner of the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction and was honored with the Library of Congress Creative Achievement Award for Fiction. He is a recipient also of the Peggy Helmerich Distinguished Author Award in company with Shelby Foote, Eudora Welty, and Wendell Berry. And we are thrilled and honored to have John with us for this inaugural session of G&G Reads. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
So the first time I met John Grisham, and John doesn't know this story because he would have no cause to remember this, but I was it was early mid-90s. I was up on the balcony of the City Grocery Bar with an editor that John had done some business with, and John was walking underneath and caught the eye and was coming up the stairs, and this person, for whatever reason, I don't know, did not want John to know he was drinking beer at the middle of the day. And so he pushed his beer to me. So now I have 2 in front of me. And John comes up and I get introduced, and I'm an empath. I wanted to help my friend with this ruse. So I just started alternating with the beers to keep the bit going. And after John and him had their little business, John kind of gave me this kind of squirrely side eye. And you're skeptical, and what else could I do? I just said, "Nice to meet you."
Did I take a beer?
No, you got out of there, unfortunately, yeah. The common ground that John and I do share is that we both sort of marinated in the literary world of Mississippi in the 80s and 90s, particularly Oxford. And to begin with, I'd like to begin back there and back then, and by asking about a young lawyer and 2-term state representative who, from all appearances, had a solid and fulfilling existence, but decided to do the most ridiculous thing in the world, to try to write a novel. Tell me about him and tell me about where that strange impulse came from.
Well, first of all, it's always nice being in Charleston. I love Charleston, and every time I come here, and I've never spent much time here, but when I come to Charleston, I always think about Pat Conroy. And Pat was a dear friend. I met him in 1993. I was introduced to Pat in about 1986 with The Prince of Tides. I never heard of him. And I loved that book, and I went back and read The Great Santini, The Lords of Discipline, The Waters Run, all these books, and he had such a wonderful sort of a love-hate, mainly love relationship with Charleston. Pat had love-hate with everybody, everything, every play, whatever. Pat was Pat. But every time I come to Charleston, I always think about Pat, and later he wrote, Beach Music and South Abroad and all of his novels, and we were lucky enough to meet him, and he visited us one week in Charlottesville for a few days. And anyway, he was a great friend who died way too young. And we all miss Pat. Everybody who loves books, and especially Charleston, loves Pat. So I always think of Pat when I come here. What was your question? Oh,
Yeah.
The Time to Kill.
Yeah.
Well, it was not planned. It's not like I had some great, brilliant idea about how to become a best-selling writer. None of it was planned. Okay, it was an effort to. I thought about making a buck because I was a small-town lawyer in Mississippi about to starve, and I had this idea for what I thought might be a pretty good courtroom drama, as seen through the eyes of me, a young idealistic attorney, with a young, beautiful wife having babies, and life was good and all that kind of stuff. And I had this courtroom drama based on something I had seen in court one time about a father who seeks retribution. And so I started writing the first fiction I'd ever written in my life. I didn't dream of being a writer. I didn't just study creative writing. I never thought about it. But I was 30 years old, and I thought, this is a hell of a story. This is a great story. So initially my motives were pure. It was all about a story, okay? I got greedy later. And I'm still greedy. I write for money, okay?
Cormac McCarthy once said the ugly truth is that books are made out of other books. I don't know why Cormac decided that was an ugly truth, but there it is. And I think essentially meaning that writing comes from reading. What were you reading back then? Who were the authors? Who were your models when you were writing Time to Kill, or the early books? Whose books did you see next to yours on the shelf in your imagination?
Well, again, I wasn't thinking about books on the shelf.
Yeah.
Being in Mississippi, growing up in Mississippi, there's a state law that requires every high school English teacher to try to teach Faulkner. And we got it shoved down our throats as kids. That's why we all grew up disliking Faulkner. And it's hard to get away from that. But I had a really strong high school English teacher who had sympathy on us, and we had to read Faulkner. It's the law. But she also let us read, she taught us to read other great writers. And I fell in love with the books of John Steinbeck when I was a high school kid. And we had Faulkner on one hand, Steinbeck on the other. And I remember thinking, I wish I could write this clearly, like Steinbeck, okay? So that was an influence, but again, I wasn't thinking about writing. It evolved to the point to where I thought I had a good story, and I said, what the heck? I need a new hobby. I have nothing else to do in life, so I'm going to spend a few hours a day trying to write this courtroom drama. And I was not smart enough to plan this.
So you write A Time to Kill, and you send it out, as one does, to be published in book form. It comes back. You send it out again, and it comes back again. How many times does it come back?
About 30. I had my motives were pure. Then I got greedy, and about halfway through, I realized I'm going to finish this book. So I started thinking about getting it published, as we all do. Mm-hmm. It's a dream. Yeah. Writing is no fun if people aren't reading what you write. It's just not any fun. And so I had this idea that I would try to get published. So I started reading all the magazine articles and books about how to get published. I bought a book one time, $14 for a book, How to Become a Best-Selling Author, written by a guy who hadn't sold a damn thing. But that was my life. I was reading that stuff, okay? And so as I finished the book and got it typed up, it was almost 1,000 pages, way too long. I made a list of, this is way before the internet, I made a list of agents and editors. Back then you could submit to editors. You can't do it now. It has to go through an agent. But I had 15 and 15. And so I was serving in the state legislature in Mississippi. So I went off to Jackson, to the Capitol for the session. And my secretary made 10 copies of the first 3 chapters and a cover letter and sent 5 and 5, 5 to agents, 5 to editors. And we kept doing this back. And I'd come home, the rejections would pile up, and went back and forth. And it was kind of fun. I mean, getting the rejection letters. One of the first rejection letters came from a senior editor at Doubleday named Herman Golub, and it was a personal note. Well, I knew from my vast research that to get that far, somebody had read the book and passed it up. And Herman said, good but not good enough. And I kept that letter, and I showed it to him later. I went home one time from Friday afternoon. I was home from the Capitol in Jackson. I went by the office. There was a stack of rejection letters, and I went home. Renee was fixing dinner. The kids were very small, and we talked about the week. And I said, "Hey, I got a bunch more rejection letters." And she said, "You're sending off the first 3 chapters. Those are not the best chapters," because she read the book more than she wanted to. She said, "Why don't you send the first chapter which is, fairly dramatic, and also the 4th chapter, and also the 7th chapter. And I said, 3 chapters at random? She said, well, yeah. I said, well, that's pretty stupid. I mean, who wants to read 3 random chapters? And she said, you're not doing so damn well on your own, okay? So why don't you? I said, okay, this is all a game. This is a game for us, okay? We're not doing this for a living. It's fun. So I took those chapters, and I sent out the next batch to editors and agents, and within a week, 3 agents had called wanting to represent me. And so I went home and I said, okay, honey, what's next? What do we do next? And that's how I got the first agent. And then once I got the first agent, he went through the whole list again of the people who already said no to me, and they said no to him the second time. And I sent the manuscript to him as soon as I signed up, and FedEx to New York, and called the next day, and he's a tough old New York guy, and I said, did you get the manuscript? What happens next? He said, look, don't be calling me every day. He said, you sent me the book. If it can be sold, I will sell it. Listen to my advice. Start another book. It'll keep you busy, and you won't be calling me every day. And by the time you get it finished, I'll have this one sold. I said, well, don't worry. I'll never call again. And I didn't for a long time. And so that's how he finally got A Time to Kill sold to an unknown small press. They printed 5,000 hardback copies in 1989. We couldn't give them away. I mean, it was a total flop. It sold well right around Memphis and Oxford. That was it. The rest of the world was not involved in it. So that's how A Time to Kill came to be.
And then that next book that you mentioned, that's The Firm.
Right.
Which I guess set your example of starting a new book right away, right? This is how you've done it all these years, which on a personal note, I have to say, is just mind-bending and also sort of a shaming example. Because when I finish a novel, I got to take a nap for 2 years, have a drink and then another year.
I've known guys like you, a lot of writers like you.
With The Firm, where did Mitch McDeere come from?
Well, every novel goes back to something that really happened.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that smart to be able to create stories out of thin air. It's all something that I saw practicing law, or I've experienced, or something I read about, or cases, or I follow law firms, litigation. That's my world, and I love it. I live in that world, and that's where all these ideas come from, because I understand the law. I understand lawyers, law firms, criminal justice, criminal injustice. That's where I hang out. Okay, and when I was in law school, this will be a real shock to all you people, I was not heavily recruited when I finished law school, because I knew I was going to go back to my hometown. I was going to marry Renee, which I did, and go back to our hometown, the girl next door, and practice law and run for the state legislature in 1983. We got married in 81. That was the plan. So I didn't interview, okay? But one of my best friends was a top student. He had interviews all over the place. I mean, for an Ole Miss law school, that meant Atlanta, Houston, Memphis, Kansas City, New Orleans, the southern area. And he would go off every week and come back, and we'd grill him. What was the firm like? How much money did they offer you? What were the perks? All this kind of stuff. And so we vicariously lived through him going through the recruiting. And he came back one weekend from I think it was like Kansas City. He said, man, that was a weird law firm. It was a tax law firm. And I got the impression that once you joined the firm, you never left. And I thought, that's pretty good. For some reason, I filed that away for about 8 years. And when A Time to Kill came out, I was already thinking about the next book. And I pitched the idea to Renee of that law firm, of the firm. That was the working title. I never thought it would stick. And that's how the book got started, but she loved the idea from the very beginning. And so I wrote The Firm in 2 years and sent it off to New York, and everything changed. That was it.
When I revisited The Firm for this conversation, one thing that really struck me was how dark some of the veins are running through that novel. I mean, Mitch cheats on Abby, and our heroes abscond with $10 million that, that isn't theirs. These were choices that you made as an author, playing with moral ambiguity, kind of messing around in the gray areas. One of the things that I tell my students that the gray areas are that's where fiction is sticky. That's where it carries a meaning. It's not to bring Faulkner back in, but that idea of the heart in conflict with itself. Was that a conscious thing, and is it still a conscious thing playing in those areas of?
I don't know how conscious it is. You're right about people, the decisions they face, the decisions they make, and the consequences. I don't always stop and think, what are the what are the moralities here? I'm much more concerned with telling a story that's fast, that's got you hooked, that's got the pages turning. You ask me what I read when I was a kid and even a student. I read tons of mystery, suspense. That's what I enjoy reading. The thrillers, the really fast stuff. Good fiction, good popular fiction. Yeah. That's what I grew up with, and that's what I've always wanted to aspire to write. Nothing beyond that. But obviously, in any story, you've got characters, you've got injustice, you've got pain, you've got drama, you've got people who make decisions that are wrong, and they have to deal with the consequences. I don't sit back and say, okay, I'm gonna make this moral dilemma more apparent to the reader. I don't deliver messages. Okay, I just try to write very suspenseful stories.
So members of G&G Reads submitted some online questions for you, and I'd like to share a few of those as we go through this. This one comes from William and Carol Cobb of Henderson, Tennessee. And the Cobbs want to know, how do you choose your specific sites within a given novel? And have you personally visited each one, i.e. Mud Island in Memphis? And if I may just piggyback onto that question, at what point does a novel setting occur to you, and how important is it?
Well, it's, when I write the Ford County books, that's where I'm from. That's rural North Mississippi. Those books are very easy because that's where I'm from. I know the people, the culture, language, politics, religion, food. It's easy. And I love those stories more than the others. I'd rather spend all my time there. But some of the books can be set anywhere in the world. I tend to go to Washington, New York, places like. I've set 2 books in Italy. One about football, believe it or not. The great thing about being a writer, you can go almost anywhere you want to go and do the research and set the story there. I don't deliberately, in the exchange, which, by the way, we're supposed to be talking about.
Yes, we're going, yeah. We're getting there.
Now available in fine bookstores everywhere. Number 1 we got knocked down last week to number 2. Lee Child came out and knocked me down to number 2 last week. Really ticked me off.
Shameful.
We'll get him in 2 weeks. Watch it. We'll be back. The exchange, Mitch is back after 15 years. When we last saw Mitch and Abby, they were, running for their lives out of Memphis, and the bad guys were behind them, and that was the end of the story. And Hollywood screwed all that up with Tom Cruise, and anyway, but it was. So it's just 15 years later. Mitch is back. He's a partner in a big international law firm in New York, and his job is to go around the world with putting out fires for big corporate clients. And so I wanted a truly international setting. So he's in Rome, he's in London, he's in Istanbul. He does not go to Libya, which is a crucial part of the story, because I have not been to Libya. I have no plans to go to Libya. But there's a scene in Marrakesh, Morocco. So yeah, I've been to those places, and it's fun to travel and also do research. And as a writer, everything you do is research. Everywhere you go, every person.
At least that's what we tell the IRS.
Oh man, if you're a writer, you can screw the IRS big time. You could travel the world, call it work. But I mean, everything we see, every person we meet, every bit of dialogue we hear, every strange name we hear, we file it away and we steal it. That's what writers do. We're thieves. We just steal stuff and come back to it later.
John Gardner said the true writer is the one taking notes at his mother's funeral. But with Mitch, now with The Exchange, you've revisited characters before, you brought some back, but you had Mitch in that cryogenic chamber of yours for 30 some years now. What prompted you to bring him back now?
I thought about him for a long time. Obviously, many years. I had too many other books to write. I kept waiting. I wasn't sure I was going to do it. 24 years passed before Jake Brigance in A Time to Kill came back to the courtroom in Sycamore Road, 2013. And when Jake came back, I never thought about a sequel, but he came back for another courtroom drama. And we were pleasantly surprised at his popularity in the book form. You know, when I wrote the book, it was very autobiographical. Jake was. Matthew McConaughey kind of, took over my character and became he made Jake very popular. And when the book when Sycamore Road came out, it was fun to watch the numbers because it was a very, very popular, well-known character. And again, I started thinking about Mitch again, but I have to wait for the story. I can't just sit down and force a story to happen. I've got to wait for some inspiration that will, create the first sign of a story that you dwell on for a long time, and hopefully it grows and grows and grows and turns into a full-blown novel, and that's how it happened.
So you bring up the movies, and by my count, I think 9 of your books have been adapted for the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And from an early point, you seem to fall into a good groove with Hollywood. Some writers have a very tortured relationship with Hollywood. Others find their groove. And you brought up McConaughey, and sorry for the name dropping, but I happened to mention this to you in the email. I happened to see him recently, and I was asking him about Time to Kill. And he said something interesting. He said that when he found out about getting that role, it was on a phone call with the director, Joel Schumacher, and you. And he told me it was the only time he's ever had the author of the source material actually award him the role. How deeply have you been involved, and do you enjoy that? Yes.
First of all, I've been very lucky with Hollywood. I've had the 9 movies, and we've enjoyed watching all of them. Yeah. I didn't get involved in any of them. Well, I didn't get too involved. With A Time to Kill, I wouldn't sell it. I mean, The Firm, Pelican Brief, Client, Chamber, Runaway Jury, it all come out, big movies in the early 1990s, and I still hadn't sold A Time to Kill. And Joel Schumacher did The Client. He really wanted to do Time to Kill, and so finally we negotiated for a long time. And I retained some controls over casting because I was very concerned about who they would cast to be Jake. And it got to be really, really contentious because they had a full-blown budget. They had a really good screenplay. They had Samuel Jackson and Sandra Bullock and both the Sutherlands and Oliver Platt. They had all these really great actors, great cast. They had no star. They couldn't find Mitch. And Joel suggested a couple of names that I won't repeat. And I said, those guys are never going to make it in a Southern courtroom with a coat and tie on. You can't do it with a fake Southern, it's not going to work. And so I vetoed. I kept vetoing. And the lawyers got involved, and I said, go back and read the contract. I had the absolute ultimate veto right over the casting of Jake, and which I could get back then. Probably couldn't get it now.
Yeah.
And so they finally, the lawyers were involved. They were ready to start shooting. They had no star. And Joel, to his credit, said, wait a minute, time out. I know a guy who's on a set of another movie, and have you seen, what was the movie, Renee? Dazed and Confused.
All right.
And I had not seen Dazed and Confused. And he said he's got a small role in Dazed and Confused, and I said, okay, I'm not going to go watch it, but Joel said, I'm going to get the guy, we'll pull him in right now for a screen test, and I'll send it to you. So we said, okay, right. So they got him in a screen test. This is back in the old days this is 1996. They sent us a big cassette overnight, FedEx, and so Renee and I are waiting at the door for FedEx to show up, and we get the cassette, we plug it in, and there's Matthew in the office, perfect accent. He doesn't have an accent. He's perfect way of speaking, and he's smoking a cigar, and I said to myself, this kid's got it. Renee said, I think I'm in love.
He did mention he thought Renee had some influence on the casting. He did say that.
And we were thrilled. I mean, we got him signed up. We called him right then. Or Joel and I called him, and he was, obviously a big break in his career. He's always been very generous.
His first starring role.
Yeah.
Another G&G Reads member question. This one's from Lou Wiley of Edisto Allen, whose favorite of your novels is The Firm. And I'm fond of this question because in my wake there are dozens and dozens of abandoned novels. The question is, do you have any half-finished or unpublished books?
I don't think so. Oh, yeah, I got the high eyebrow look. There was a novel I wrote 30 years ago when I was trying to get published. I wrote this short novel, A Fly on the Wall. No, we're not going to. She's waving me off. It went nowhere. So I do have one unfinished novel that I couldn't find right now if I had. I mean, it's nowhere in the computer. I'm sure there's a hard copy somewhere. All my papers are at the library at Mississippi State, and I'm sure they could force someone to go find it, but I'm not going to do that. I don't want to see it again. So it's not. I have one unfinished novel. Yeah.
You've had some sort of acidic fun at the expense of law, for instance, in The Exchange and over the books over the years, but you've also threaded into your work some pretty serious critiques of the criminal justice system, criminal injustice system. You serve on the board of the Innocence Project. For those unfamiliar, can you explain what the Innocence Project is and what drove and continues to drive you, your involvement in that?
You know, it goes back to a story. It all goes back to a story. And 20 years ago, I was December of 2004, I was reading flipping to the New York Times one morning, and I love the obituaries. They have great obituaries. I hope I get a nice one. Probably will. And the lead obituary was a guy standing in a courtroom in Oklahoma, and the headline was Ronald Keith Williamson, freed from death row, dies at the age of 56. And we were the same age, same race, same neck of the woods, same religion. And I was intrigued. I read the rest of the obituary, and it was written by Jim Dwyer, great writer. And Ron had just passed away, and he was the first-round draft pick of the Oakland A's in the 1972 free agent draft, a draft where my name was not called. Didn't make it. And he later went to death row and came within 5 days of being executed for murder he had nothing to do with. The obituary was the book. And I put it down, I called New York. I called Steve Rubin at Doubleday, and I said, have you seen the Times? Read the obituary. That's my next book. He said, you don't write nonfiction. And I said, well, I'm about to start. And that took me to this journey into Oklahoma, into the world of wrongful convictions. And once I realized how many of them there are thousands of them. And I joined the board of the Innocence Project, and there have been over 2,000 exonerations in the last 25 years, 400 from the Innocence Project by DNA, clear DNA cases. And I've met some of these guys. I mean, I've been to a lot of prisons, and I've correspond, and with the Innocence Project, we have our clients that we work for every day, and our job is to get them out of prison. And it takes about $300,000 to get one out. It takes about 10 years of litigation. It takes thousands of hours by volunteer lawyers to get one person out of prison serving time for somebody else's crime, and there are thousands of them there. And so that's our job, and it's slow, tedious work, but we're fully committed, and that's the Innocence Project. And there are like 50 Innocence Projects around the country. The main one is in New York, but most of them are attached to law schools, and the kids volunteer. They love the work. My son volunteered at the Ole Miss Law School when he was there for an innocence case, Innocence Project clinic, and it's great work. It's very, very depressing that we have to do this. Okay, these cases should not happen. But there are many reasons for wrongful convictions, and we're trying to work at preventing so many of them from happening, but there's still there are far too many people in prison serving somebody else's time. And I tell my more conservative friends, when you send an innocent man to prison, you probably just increase the crime rate, because we document these cases time and time again where the real rapist is still out there. The real killer's still out there, still doing what they do. And So it should be a non-political issue. It normally is, but we view it as God's work.
So it's interesting. I've heard you sort of mention here a couple moments of this sort of seed, reading something in the newspaper or what have you that eventually leads to books. And what is that process like for you? How long does that take? For, is it quick? Is it slow? Does it vary?
The exchange took 32 years.
Okay.
I mean, it took 30 years to get the story. About 10 years ago, I read online, The Atlantic had a story, The Great Law School Scam. It was about for-profit law schools. And it was a story about these kids who get sucked into going to law school, borrowing huge sums of money from the government and can't pass the bar exam because they have no business being in law school, and how the schools are making money off that. It was one magazine article. It was an instant novel. It became the Rooster Bar. I wrote it in like 4 months.
And you saw it immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. Some stories are like that, like the Ron Williamson, the wrongful conviction story. Most of them, though, take longer to kind of germinate and fester, and writers are notorious for having these brilliant ideas. And you start writing, and you write about 50,000 words in 6 months, and then you stop because you don't know who you are. And the idea was not so good once you get there. And I don't want to do that. I'm too lazy to do that. So I let it fester for a while. And once I have a really compelling opening, a hook, and I can sustain the narrative tension for 300 pages, which is the hardest part, leading up to an ending that I hope is unpredictable. When I've got those three things all mentally mapped out, then I'll start outlining. I'll start doing chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And most writers swear they don't outline. I think they're lying. Do you outline?
I don't outline formally, but I know the ending. I heard Richard Russo once say it was like throwing a pebble into a pond, and the writing process was swimming around trying to find the pebble. The pebble's the ending. I know how it ends. I don't know how to get there. Yeah. So it's almost like an outline.
Yeah, one of my little rules for writing popular fiction is do not write the first scene until you know the last scene.
Yeah, okay.
And so I was doing a book gig with John Irving, one of my favorite writers in Toronto, about 5 years ago, and I said, okay, you were quoted. Is this true? You were quoted as saying you write the last sentence before you write the first sentence. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
He said yes. I said, I'm not that smart, but I know the last scene before I write the first scene. That's what it takes to write. If you know the last scene, you're never going to get lost.
Your books are so intricately plotted often. I mean, it's like a dive you're watching. There's twists, there's turns, there's all these things. How mapped is that for you? And do you ever find yourself surprised by a plot twist, for instance?
You're surprised. You don't want to outline everything. You want to be surprised.
Yeah.
The surprises are wonderful.
Yeah.
That's part of the fun of writing is when a character pops up that you never saw before, and you need him, you need her for a scene or two, or maybe for the rest of the book. And that's you cannot outline everything. It's too important. But you can't you can't start. I can't start without an outline. It has to be a detailed outline from chapter 1 to chapter 40. 40 chapters, 100,000 words. And when you do that, when you lay out the whole story, you see things you don't need. You see a subplot you don't need, mm-hmm. or you see a subplot you do need. You can leave and also when you write suspense, it's like writing mysteries and thrillers. You have to drop off certain clues along the way. That takes planning. Yeah. You have to really be disciplined about that. I tell aspiring students the two most unpleasant aspects of writing are the most important: the outlining and the revisions, because we all hate revisions. We hate the damn copy editor, okay, who catches all the mistakes. They catch 1,000 mistakes every time. But I mean that's part of the revision that go on for months. But you have to invest the time in the outline and the revisions.
Do you have a reader that you trust, or your first initial reader?
again, I tell aspiring writers, and I don't give a lot of advice, but you've got to find somebody who loves you. It could be a spouse or a partner or a boyfriend or a high school English teacher, your mother, your grandma. It can be somebody who loves you and wants you to succeed, but can be brutally honest. And I got lucky from day one because Renee read the first chapter of A Time to Kill in longhand on a yellow legal pad, and I was a nervous wreck. And I said, what do you think? She said, where's chapter 2? And that went on for 3 years. And there were times when I would quit, and what am I doing writing a book? I'd walk in the old Walden bookstores in the malls, and then one wall is all these beautiful titles, all the bestsellers, all the latest releases, they're all right there. Most of the writers I enjoyed over the years, and I would look at dozens of books, and they're all gorgeous, and I would think, who wants to hear from me? What do I have to say to add to all this? And I would get discouraged, and I would quit for a couple of weeks and just put it down and say, I'm tired of waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I want to sleep some more. And Renee would always say, where's the next chapter? Where's the next chapter? And that was the motivation. So yeah, now she's so sick of my stuff. No, she's not sick of it. She's tired. After 50 books, she's tired of reading my stuff. Okay? I can't really blame her, but she won't let go. She still insists on reading it first. I can't just ship it off to New York. She's got to read it first. Mm-hmm. And she reads it with a red pen and has far too many opinions. And we've had some really dramatic moments.
Yeah. That can be a perilous dynamic in a
and this is what I've always said. But Renee has read everything. My agent was my first editor, David Gernert. We teamed up 32 years ago. My unofficial editor and publisher is Suzanne Hurst. She's been here. She's here. We've been here for 30 years together. And between Renee and David and Suzanne, the rules are you can say anything. You can say anything. You can criticize, good, bad, whatever. If you don't like something, say it, because I'll listen. I may not always do what they suggest, but that's very important for a writer to get that kind of feedback from people you trust. So I'm very, very lucky. I have the same team Renee's been on my team for 42 years. Suzanne's only 25, 30.
And do you have a reader in mind? And maybe it is Renee. When you start writing, a writer sometimes has this imaginary reader. John Updike said he wrote for somebody in the library looking for dirty bits in books. But just that ideal reader that's out there. Anyone you aim your books toward?
No, Johnny, I can't do that because I don't have that reader. I'm lucky. I have a lot of readers, and I hear from them. Know they're out there. I see the sales numbers. I know the books are moving. If I thought about all the people who might read the book, I'd probably go nuts. I can't. I want that reader to stay up late at night turning pages, and call in sick from work, and lie to their boss, and all that kind of stuff. Skip lunch. I want that reader to do all those things. I want the reader to read that book in 2 days. That's what I want. And it's a very deliberate effort to turn pages and keep the suspense going. That's what I love to read myself. I grew up reading suspense writers, mystery writers, and that's what I aspire. Every time out, I want to write the best book I've ever written, but I want the pages to turn.
I'm going to ask one last question. This is another one from a G&G Reads member, which is Michael DePalm, Charlotte, North Carolina, wants to know, and you've sort of answered this, but do you write for personal enjoyment? And I'll just add to that, 49 books, right? What keeps you in the chair?
I have nothing else to do. There's from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. every morning. That's when I write. Okay, every morning. This morning, I won't do it tomorrow, but I'll do it Wednesday morning. That's if I'm home, and we'll take off and go do anything. But if I'm home, it's 7:30 to 11, 4 hours of pretty intense writing, 1,000 words a day. Yeah, it's too much. It's too much. Sometimes more. Sometimes
make you break
less.
a sweat.
But you do that, for 200 days a year. That's a lot of words, and so you can do 2 books a year. But it's just what I do. I did it this morning at 7:30. I'm in chapter 35 of the next book, and having a ball. Just having a great scene, really enjoying the writing. My little office, is dark and quiet, no phone, no fax, no internet, no music, nothing but me and, strong coffee at 7:30. And I still treasure those moments every day. So I do it for personal enjoyment. And I love the money. I'm not going to lie about it, okay? We enjoy that.
What a great combination, now, right? Personal enjoyment and plus compensation. Yeah. John, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Johnny. Good seeing you again. Okay. Thank you.